Hello, welcome to the Bible study for this evening, and we are at a really crucial point. There's two great things going on in the Old Testament. We're getting ready for the great Mount Sinai experience, and the New Testament, we have the Transfiguration going on. So great Wednesday to have a Bible study. Before we go anywhere, let's start with prayer. Dear Lord, thank you again for the tremendous privileges we have here in America and the blessings we have in South Central Pennsylvania. We are so blessed. God, forgive us if we ever sound like those spoiled brats and complain in the midst of our abundance. We remember your persecuted church and what they're going through. God, thank you. Now, especially we ask your blessing on this Bible study as it unfolds, that the questions and answers come out to just bring this story to life. Help us to be in the moment and experience what they're experiencing and think this through. And always look for your hand in there, God. So we ask you to bless this time for the growth of your children. Amen. Okay, well, while you're getting warmed up, let me go down here. Object of the parable. I love this quote. It's to convey an actual truth in the story, and by the unguarded comments of the listener, to convict him from his own mouth. Remember when David was cheating on Uriah and he wedded Bathsheba? Then he gets confronted by the prophet. The guy had one ewe lamb, loved it like his own child, and the rich guy took it and killed it. And David said, that guy deserves to die. And the prophet says, yeah, you're that guy. Out of your own mouth. You know, the Good Samaritan. Who was the Good Samaritan? The guy couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. He said, the guy who helped him. Yeah, that's your neighbor. So it's a great way of making it happen, where the listener answers their own question, and then he has to think about it. Moses and the burning tree. We're looking at that today. I think it's pretty good because it looked at this bush that wouldn't be consumed. And many times in Scripture, we look at God as a consuming fire. So the fire, not only in Hebrew literature, but in other ancient religions, fire was a representation of God. The 10 plagues. As I was going through this, I realized as I was reading the word Hebrew that the King James English translated it to plagues, so we get the idea, could also be considered blows or strikes. You know, so not only did God send 10 plagues on Egypt, he delivered 10 crushing blows to their gods. And if you didn't know this, each one of these 10 represent a deity of some kind. The Nile god, the river god. The frog, one of the gods had, I think, the face of a frog. Another one had the nuts. There was gnats, lice, gnats, the dust, the fertile soil was a god of the soil. The flies, I forget the livestock and all that. Each one of those was a direct assault, being more powerful than one of their gods. So he dealt those blows to the Egyptian gods as well as the plagues on Egypt. And the final blow was what he did to Pharaoh's army as crossing the Red Sea. But each one of those did represent a particular god. And I think there was something else. I forget what we were talking about before.
But the number 10 in the Egyptian in Egypt means fullness, that it was complete.
Yeah.
So at the end of 10, punishment was complete.
And with the 10 plagues, if you were here at the Seder Supper, you may remember that there's a portion of, when you mention each of the plagues, you say, fat. You diminish your wine with blood, fat, frogs, fat, gnats, fat. Well, I found a Seder plate that had that idea, but look what the third one was, wild beasts. There was blood, fat, frogs, fat, lice or gnats, fat, wild beasts. We didn't have wild beasts in our story. We had flies. And I didn't take the time, but somewhere within Jewish tradition, apparently there was wild beasts in there. Then the cattle, and what I'm seeing a lot of times is cattle disease, but my Bible reads death. So they weren't just sick, A lot of the other images showed sick cattle. They were, yeah, pictures and stuff. The boils, the hail. Oh, that was at my office. I had a Ripley's Believe It or Not article about hail. And the largest hailstones that were ever found, there were something like the size bigger than softballs that were coming down out of the sky. Hail storm the size of softballs could easily kill you. Locusts, darkness. Again, the sun god, Ra. He's more powerful than the sun god? Yeah. And then the angel of death. Oh, and this is interesting too. It's not killing the firstborn of Egypt. It's the angel of death that passed over our ancestors. So there's a different way of looking at these 10 blows. Was killing the firstborn. That was affliction on the Egyptians. But the angel of death coming was not only the affliction on the Egyptians, but the salvation of the Jews. It's interesting. They also mentioned the 10 plagues, but with a little variation on it there. I just realized I'm using my pointer or my mouse instead of going around like this. The wild beasts instead of the flies, and the angel of death instead of the firstborn. And then, of course, we all know what Moses looked like because you've seen the movie.
Oh, yeah.
There he is. There we know exactly what he looked like. Awfully fair skinned, I thought. And tall, too. I understand, there's a little trivia, they made the walls stand up using Jell-O. Well, it's not a spoiler for you. But they used Jell-O for the movie.
Yeah, we drove through
We've
it.
driven through it in Universal Studios.
Oh, okay.
Where they filmed it, yeah.
Okay.
Just a little.
A lot of Jello.
Jell-O's old man. Yeah, the New Testament, the hidden treasures. And did anybody find this interesting? Kingdom of Heaven is like a hidden treasure in a field. Man found it, he hid it again, and he went and sold everything he had to buy the field. Wasn't that kind of like, that's not very Christian? He should have said, hey, dude, you know you have this treasure out here? Finder's fee or something like that. Did anybody think that was kind of not right to do? Have you thought about it?
About that, but never asked
I
my
know.
portable dictionary.
Yeah. I read a commentary recently that said, well, you know, sometimes people didn't trust banks, so they hid stuff out in the fields. Well, if it was my field, I know it's out there. I'm not going to sell it with the treasure hidden there. I think a better explanation is, in times of warfare, when invading armies come, people hide their treasures and they flee. And then when the war is over, they come back, dig up their treasure, and go on with their life. So obviously, if this treasure was lost and hidden, someone buried that treasure, went off to flee from the invading army, and never came back.
Right.
So now the owner has it, has no idea what's out there. So it's fair game. It's not like it's the landowner's private stuff. It's like that. This happens during warfare. People bury their treasures. So then he realizes no one else does. He has by this field. Totally legitimate, nothing unethical in what he would have done there.
You ruined the plot of Oak Island.
Of what?
Oak Island.
Oh. Okay. Oh, well, sorry about that. I guess game's over. How's it going? Kingdom of Heaven merchant, beautiful pearl. I often thought about that. Well, if he does that, then he's broke. Well, if he knows how to make money, he bought that. Now he goes on to making more money. The parables, again, to make you think. If a guy would do that for the treasure in the hidden field, what would you do for an indescribable treasure? It would make sense to sell everything you have just to have that tremendous gain. So what would you do if you came across something of immeasurable value? Would you hold out? Would you like put 90% of yourself into it? You know, that kind of thing. And then there's the passage about the Syrophoenician woman and her child is suffering, and Jesus says, oh, it's not right to give to the bread to the dogs. Does that sound a little cruel? Well, that doesn't, but the idea of not giving the bread to the dogs, there's a better picture of it. You know. That does sound cruel, but you need to understand it from the perspective that Jesus is testing this woman's faith. What would you do if you came to some healer and you asked for something? He said, hey, go away. I'm not giving you this for your dog. Just leave it. She was so humble. She was willing to be humiliated. Now, the Jews didn't keep domestic dogs. They were considered mongrels. But Gentiles did. The Greeks, the Romans, they had domesticated dogs. And it was natural for them to give the dogs the crumbs that fell from the table. This woman's incredible humility. So fine, call me a dog. But even the dogs get the crumbs. God, all I need from you is the crumbs of your power. I believe in you so much, you don't have to do a big deal, just the crumbs. Jesus says, good answer. Good answer. You're healed. She's healed. So there's a lot of times it looks like, well, Jesus is really mean. He's testing faith. And she came through in shining colors. At last they understood that Jesus was not speaking about the yeast and the bread, but about the deceptive teachings of the Pharisees and Sadducees. They just did some miracles, fed 4,000 this time, coming across a lady saying, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees. And they're like, he's upset because we didn't bring bread. And they're arguing about that. He says, are you still so dull? You don't get this? Now that we can look back and go, oh yeah, they were pretty lame. All right, bring it to the 21st century. This is the so what part if it was a sermon. What's the teachings of the Pharisees and the Sadducees today that we need to be careful about? Jesus wasn't talking about bread. He was talking about inflating something. That's what yeast does. What are the modern day Pharisees and Sadducees, and how do they inflate something that we need to be aware of? Your first question.
They're usually inflating their own ego.
Mm-hmm. There was a passage where Jesus criticized them. He says, you claim you honor your fathers, but you create rules for yourselves that dishonor the law. You tell a man, your mother and father, that you're not going to give him their money because you've made it korban, you've dedicated it to God. You've violated the laws of God, taking care of your parents because of these rules you've created. There's one example of people creating something that God never intended. And it's a barrier for the parents. Why would we need to be careful about that today?
All the COVID rules.
COVID rules and what that does to fellowship and sharing and openness. And I'm a United Methodist. I've been a United Methodist the whole time I'm preaching, but I will tell you that our book of discipline is about bigger than some people's Bibles. That might be something to look into. We've always done it this way. This is how our church does it. It may not be right, but this is our thing. Oh no, it has to be laid out just like that. I don't mind telling you, I was at a church one time and we were getting ready for Christmas and the Advent wreath came out and they were arguing about how it should be placed. Someone went back in the closet, pulled out a 3-ring binder, and there was an 8x10 glossy picture of the wreath and exactly how it was supposed to be laid out. So right there it is. Oh yes, you're right. It should be turned like this. Really? Whoa. That just stopped me in my tracks.
And you don't know where the photographer was standing.
No, you can't. But it told me that there were people in the past who laid out the rules and everybody was afraid to violate those rules because they said that's how it's done. Beware. And then the last one here, we finish in the New Testament with the transfiguration. And I couldn't help bring that in because what's that around Jesus?
The almond.
The almond?
Lights. Oh, the almonds, right.
The mandorla.
The intersection of
The intersection. Very good. Yes, the intersection of the two worlds come together. There's another one. And someone else might have been, Barbara already asked me this, is like, how did they know it was Moses and Elijah? Did they have name tags on?
I
And the only answer that I've never has anybody ever said this, but it's just they knew. They knew, yeah. Now, in the depictions, you always see Moses with the Ten Commandments. Anytime they draw him out, oh, he's got the Ten Commandments. Elijah doesn't really have anything. He's holding out his hands there. But there really isn't anything more than that. They just knew. They absolutely knew.
Was Moses taken up?
Moses had been buried by God at some place unknown. We never knew where he was found. Yeah. But you realize that Moses and Elijah basically represent the Old Testament, the first covenant, the law and the prophets. This is entirely embodied in Moses and Elijah. And you see the three guys who are sleeping. They each have their own little halo. And of course, Jesus not only has a halo, but he's got the cross. And he's got the symbol of the cross behind his head as well, which always in pictures separates him from everybody else. They got halos, he's got the cross. All right, well, that's your warm-up. So now I will stop the share. And what questions do you have since last week?
I'd like to know where you can catch one of them fish that has a coin in his mouth.
Yeah.
It's called Jaws, tiger shark. They eat everything.
Not only does God know, he's in control of the fish, he's in control of the miracle. And he told Peter, the first one you throw in it. Talk about being on top of things.
First thing that I was curious about, Exodus 4:24, the Lord stopped Moses and tried to kill him.
Yeah. Moses, I am not messing around. I have
And
these
what
rules.
really got me is he tried to kill him. How I didn't think the Lord could, everything he did, it should be succeeded, right?
Well, he was about to kill him. This translation says he was about to kill him. He was moving to kill him. He was going to kill him. Moving. And then Zipporah intervened with the flint knife
Yeah.
and touched Moses' feet with it. Another euphemism. They really didn't put it as big toe. It was a euphemism for something else. Bridegroom of blood. And so the Lord let him alone. Yeah, I think this was, do you remember when Balaam was called out to curse the Israelites and the donkey stops 3 different times? He's going and the donkey stares out of the way and he beats him. The 3rd time, there's an angel blocking the path and the angel just lays down. You know, it was when the angel finally showed, actually he says, "What are you doing?" And the donkey says, "Why are you beating me?" It's like, you know, I'd be like, "I'm done." What?
The donkey said that?
Yeah, the donkey actually spoke. And then the angel appears and he says, "Look, your donkey kept you from being killed. The donkey's interventions. Understand, I am not messing around. When I tell you to say something, you say exactly what I'm saying." I see the same thing going on here. It was like, Moses, I am not messing around.
Okay.
This is deadly serious. You do what I tell you to do. And, circumcision was a way of setting special people apart. It wasn't new to the Jews. It wasn't unique to the Jews. Royalty and priests were served in the Egyptian culture. So when he says to the Jewish nation, "You're all going to get circumcised," you're all a nation of royal and priests. You're a nation of priests. So
Were they disrobed enough that everybody would know? I mean,
no.
I mean, it seemed like they kind of picked them out. Oh, you're not, you are, you're not.
You know,
Been times where they've,
no.
it was just because of the people that they were.
It was the people knowing that they were Jews, you know, the circumcised or uncircumcised Gentile, because you wouldn't hear no person kind of thing. No. In their culture, the Greeks would do athletics in the nude, but a Jew would never expose himself. That's ultimate humiliation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Exodus 7, it was 7 and 8 we read. It was when God had hardened Pharaoh's heart. And the magicians kept doing the same thing that Moses was doing. Was that just to kind of, was he egging them on? I mean, was God kind of egging them on like, okay, I'll do a couple of things that I know you can do, and then you're done.
You see the progression.
Yeah, because I mean, after I got to the end, I was like, okay, I kind of see it now.
Yeah, yeah. But it also points out that they did indeed have powers.
I'm just gonna say, how did they do it?
They had magic powers. And again, it's kind of like, if you can believe Jesus was born a virgin, came back to life, he can raise people from the dead, then you believe in supernatural powers. And if God and Jesus were the only ones that had supernatural powers, then Satan would have nothing. Obviously, Satan has supernatural powers. Satan can make things happen too. So yeah, magicians were real. When Paul got to Ephesus, and magicians burnt their scrolls, it was something like $50,000, a huge amount. These scrolls they had power. And if you've done anything in demonic spiritual worship today or warfare, and I wouldn't recommend it, but the idea is that you can conjure up demons and spirits. And if you say exactly the right incantation and say exactly the right thing, you can make that demon do what you want it to do. But they hate being controlled. So if you mess up in any one way, they'll turn on you and tear you up. I mean, that's part of it. So the reality of it, yeah, they had natural powers. They could make things happen. I love the idea though that he turns the staff into a snake, and they do the same thing. And then what happens after that?
Is he?
Seeds.
Yeah. You remember Joseph and Pharaoh's dream? The 7 cows that were fat got eaten up by the lean ones. The 7 wheat stalks got eaten up by the lean ones. Which is more powerful? Yeah, we made snakes too. Oh, you just ate all of our snakes. Okay, we're gonna ignore that. It's like, yeah. And the blood. If the river all turned into blood, and everything turned into blood, how could the Egyptians turn into blood?
Yeah, it was already
It was already blood.
I said that too.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute. It was already blood.
Where are you going with that?
Yeah,
Maybe there was a puddle over here.
Yeah. Now, well, they said what the Egyptians had to do was dig down to get water out of the ground to get drinking water. So when everything turned to blood, you would think, yeah, there had to be some place where there wasn't blood. And maybe they had to dig down to get the water and say, look, we can do this too. You know. And I've heard many liberal or postmodern commentators say, well, of course, what happened was there's this algae that gets in the water and makes everything look red and turns into blood and all that. And then that algae killed the fish, which brought the flies on. You know, can you believe in a virgin birth? Can you believe in resurrection? What's the problem with turning water into blood? I mean, if God created all this out of nothing, he's the programmer. What's the problem with him being able to do that?
Well, I guess
No.
the blood had to change back into water for the frogs eventually.
Well, but he cleared it out and, it swept downstream and stuff. Yeah.
I
And
heard,
it's
I heard somebody say about the parting of the Red Sea that area was only 2 feet deep. That's how they got across. And then there's the question, well, how did the army drown?
yeah, it's a miracle.
They
Pharaoh's
drowned in
army drowned in 2 feet of water.
They
you know?
say you could drown in a
They did all over face down.
yeah.
Something about it.
Yeah.
But it says it all.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that the magicians say that this is the hand of God. Or something.
Finger.
Or the finger
This
of
is the
God.
finger of
Yeah,
God.
after the 3rd plague.
Yeah.
But Pharaoh still didn't believe that. So the Pharaoh didn't listen to his advisors.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting that God had hardened his heart. He tells Moses, I'm going to harden his heart before you even get there.
Yeah, right.
Because I'm going to bring these blows, I'm going to completely destroy. I think when we were off the camera last week, you mentioned something about the 11th hour conversion.
Mhm.
And is that true for like everybody? It's like there are situations where God says, no, you've been weighing the balance and you came up weak and you're going to finish. Belshazzar, that was the mini tekel. Daniel said, God, you've been weighing the balance and you came up short. You're going to die. Ain't no repentance. It's just waiting to be fulfilled. The sentence is cast, now waiting for the Pharaoh. You're done. I'm going to completely destroy you and your nation. And there is no chance because I've already made up my mind. You're done. Yeah, his own people are saying, we can't handle this. The magicians finally got so many boils, they couldn't even stand in front of Moses anymore.
Did the king get boils?
Oh, yeah, everybody.
The animals eating that boy.
Yeah,
Yeah, I got a question on that.
yeah.
Because not Matthew, not Matthew, Exodus 9:4-6, it's the plague where the Lord will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and Egypt, and all the Egyptian animals will die. Okay, but then you go down to in the 10th verse of that, then it's the plague about the boils, and it said all the animals and the people got boils on. Does that mean that was the Israelis' animals got boils on that, or the,
Wasn't it the livestock that died, not the animals? Because I was thinking maybe it was the animals,
The
like the
horses,
dogs
donkeys,
and the
camels.
cats. And that,
cattle, sheep, goats? Maybe it was just livestock.
I'll give you another one now. What comes up later on at the parting of the Red Sea, Moses takes out 300 of his best chariots and horsemen. Wait, where did they get the horses?
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. That
They
was
were
my
Jewish
third one.
horses.
There's 3 different times they named the animals, but I thought they were all destroyed,
Yeah.
they went and got some more.
They were
Yeah,
different.
He was the Pharaoh.
Maybe they
Oh, wait a
stole
minute.
them.
Overnight delivery.
There could have been years between these flags.
Well, that was
There
going to be
could have
Could have
been.
been.
The other explanation is when it gets all the animals died, that meant sheep, goats, horses, cattle, donkeys, not every last one of every single animal, but all the animals died.
Well, it didn't, I don't know.
I don't
Because
know
in
that it's,
verse 6, all the livestock of the Egyptians died, but not one animal belonging to the Israelites died.
Mhm.
A livestock is different than an animal. I mean, because they had other animals.
Because mine says.
all the livestock died.
Yeah.
Meaning that everyone is susceptible to COVID. Rich, poor, black, white. It doesn't mean everybody gets COVID. It means everybody is susceptible. All the livestock died. Every kind of livestock they had, but not every
Not
single
every
one.
There was 100, not 100.
But there wasn't,
You know, livestock.
there wasn't any species that wasn't affected. All the livestock.
But in verse 4, it says, but the Lord will make a distinction between
Yeah.
the livestock of Israel and that of Egypt,
Yeah.
so that no animal belonging to the Israelites will die. So to me, that sounds like the livestock didn't die.
The Israelites' livestock did not. None of them.
Okay,
Cow, donkey,
Okay.
none of that died.
all right.
Among the Egyptians, all of their livestock, cows, donkeys,
Okay.
sheep, goats,
all types.
all types, but not every last single one of them. So, and that's the only logical explanation where he could come up with 300 chariot horses and horsemen. I mean, all jokes about overnight delivery aside, I mean, yeah, not that fast. And how many years it took to do this, that's been something I read recently. Someone actually said it was 40 years during this place. It's like, most were thinking it was
How
40
many?
when he killed the Egyptian. Spent 40 years in the wilderness. It was 80 when he went back. And there were 40 years in the wilderness with the Israelites. He died at 120. So I don't think he spent 40 years during the plagues. And there was, it didn't happen like the next day necessarily. There were 7 days, different things. I didn't write it out.
Yeah.
But, set the time for tomorrow. And
I get a little bit concerned about people that get into the minutia and start counting the number of days, and I want to know how many. And is it the Reed Sea or the Red Sea?
Yeah.
Is it algae or not? And the point is, it happened, and God made it happen, and He saved His people. So, okay,
And the point is, God had control over each one of those situations where the Egyptians trusted their God for it. Ra, the sun god. Oh, he is all powerful. Dark for 3 days.
Yeah.
The healing, scoliosis or whatever. Okay, there's boils. Deal with that. His blows, his constant blows to the Egyptians' hierarchy of gods.
That's what I said in the Old Testament. I have to really concentrate on not just reading the information and absorb the context of what's going on.
And I agree with you said, and we said this at the very beginning. When Moses is writing this out, he wasn't writing history. He was writing theology. And in their world, history was what the gods did in relation to natural events. The gods caused the floods. The gods caused the drought. The gods caused good times or bad times. And so this is over and over again showing how God is in absolute control. Even in a foreign country. I mean, God, his promised land is here, and they believe God's had power within their own territory. But here, God in Egypt, completely pounding 10 of the greatest gods they have, demonstrating his power. It's just theology. And you're right, you know, was it a week? Was it 2 weeks? Was it, you know, that didn't even, like I could imagine those looking at you and like, what? Why would you even ask that? You know, that doesn't matter. It matters to us because we're used to thinking terminology. We think Greek, not Hebrew.
Speaking of Hebrew,
Huh.
when did they actually start calling them Jews and Jewish? Because I haven't seen that word. I mean, I know who they are, but it's
Yeah.
Hebrews and Israelites and chosen people. When does the Jewish?
Jews comes out of Judah.
Oh, is it where they're from? Okay.
Yeah. Judah became the dominant tribe. But yeah, here they were Tabaros, Hebrews, wandering people. So if you came from Moabite as a wandering shepherd, you'd be a Hebrew. Because in their Egyptian language, you're wandering nomad. And you're the first, yeah. They don't refer to themselves as Hebrews, I don't think. And so-
No, it's an
Israelites from Israel, but yeah, they were referred. Other people referred to them as Hebrews.
In the ninth plague, it does say that there were 3 days of darkness.
Yeah,
The locusts couldn't possibly have eaten all the plants in one day. That must have been more than one day.
and that's entirely possible too. And then a hailstorm killed something that would have been at head at that point,
Right.
but the other crops hadn't sprouted yet. So that's why there was
Right.
something for the locusts to eat. So there would have been time frame in between there for them to come up.
Right.
You know. So yeah, I wouldn't say, well, this was day 1, day 2, day 3. There was some time in between. Certainly was. But I'm with Dick on trying to nail it down to how many weeks this actually took to happen. Or it's just like,
It doesn't matter if it was years. That was a barrage of a mess.
At first, I couldn't understand why the Lord made the king stubborn. I was like, wouldn't it be a lot easier not to just make him stubborn and just, okay. He wanted to prove the point and show his power.
He wanted to show the Egyptians. It says a couple times he wanted to make sure the Egyptians know
Right.
that he's in charge and he was doing this. I think the last one was before the parting of the Red Sea. And the Egyptians will know that I'm in control.
Yes, I figured it out as I was reading.
Yeah.
It would have been easier just to,
But didn't he want to make an impression on the Israelites because they've been living in Egypt for 400 years?
Yeah.
What they knew as a culture was more Egyptian than anything else.
And they heard about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but where was he for the last couple hundred years?
Yeah.
You know, but these gods are controlling things. And yeah, so God says, let me show you about those gods. And I'm going to make a point. And he says this several times. He's going to show the Egyptians just how powerful he is.
I think the last one is chapter 14, verse 18 of Exodus.
Okay.
I've gotten to look down on that.
Yeah, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord when I gain glory over Pharaoh, his chariots and his horsemen. Here's the final blow. Now, this wasn't a plague, but the same word would have been for blows or plagues. He dealt all those blows to the gods. There's a final blow he's going to blow to Pharaoh. Yeah, and then at the end of that chapter, when verse 31, when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. That lasted about a week.
Yeah, until they got to where they didn't have any water, and
3
they
days
started
out
crying
of
again.
nowhere.
What happened?
Yeah.
But even the Hebrews at this time, or whatever you call them, weren't they primarily Egyptian? If you live in a country for 400 years,
Culturally,
yeah,
I suppose culturally they may have been because they didn't have a lot of instruction. They would have known about their God and been praying to him for a long time and still being slaves.
But they were separated from.
Yeah, but not
the
heritage wise.
Egyptians.
They would have stayed with their own people. And they would have had their own,
but
when
they
they,
immediately
worship.
wanted to go back because they had things better.
yeah, well, that was just,
They really didn't have an organized way to worship. How would they worship? The
They
God
didn't
never
have a
gave them
synagogue.
instructions. Huh?
They did not have a synagogue in
Instructions
Egypt.
or
There were no instructions. They were not told how to worship. Their ancestors built an altar here and there and worshiped a God where Jacob saw the staircase to heaven. But here they are in Egypt, and
No organized priest or anything
No.
like that.
so they didn't keep the traditions of their people. of their
And that was why,
ancestors.
There were many.
I think there were no traditions.
that was why what Moses started to say there, that was why that's so important today even. Because that was like a sacrament or a tradition
Yeah.
that pulled them together, which they didn't really have before.
You mean the Passover? Passover?
Passover meal,
Right,
Seder
and,
supper,
you
yes.
know, on the 10th month, the 10th of the month, and this particular month and all that, and
Yeah.
having that meal.
the other thing's always puzzled me is, it seems to me, and I don't know where it is, but he says that this will be observed forever by the people.
Mhm.
Right.
I've never celebrated it. Wasn't I adopted into that?
Well, again,
The Jews do.
these are laws and stipulations for the Jews in their era and their time. They're not ours. Paul makes a big thing of saying that we're not bound by the laws. So just throw out the whole Old Testament. Why? No. There's principles behind those laws. Everything we see in here reveals the heart of God. And that's why when Paul says the scriptures are useful for edification and for learning about God, what scriptures are we talking about? The only thing they had was what we call the Old Testament. That's the only scripture they had at that point. When Paul's writing, nothing wasn't written down yet. So this tells us about God. These rules and regulations, these stipulations were for their time and their era. So if we understand their era, this is the cultural context. What does it tell us about God compared to everybody else in their world? And this kind of moves into the 10 Commandments that are coming up. God was not laying out the perfect society with the 10 Commandments. He wasn't saying, okay, this is how you be like me in heaven, and this is how you live. He was saying, in the world you live in, this is how you operate. He deals with slaves. 21st century, slaves are wrong. If there was a statue anywhere, people would be pulling it down.
Yeah.
But it's their culture. And their culture, the slaves were treated much better than anything else going. Women were treated much better than anything else going on. Now, we can get into that a little more when we actually go through these different things. I hope you find places where like, well, that sounds really hard of God. And I think I'll be able to tell you, well, that may sound hard now, but compared to what culture was, that was a step forward. That was God showing them to be more merciful than anything that was going on before. So you need to keep that in mind. God was not saying, this is how you live a perfect life, follow these things. This is how you live honoring me in this culture. These are things you will and won't do. So that's, again, very important to keep in mind. So what do? This ladder of abstraction. You take the law, and you take that, what is the principle behind that? And you bring that principle up to the modern days. And how would you apply this principle to today when you learn something about God? Now, we didn't get to the stipulations yet, but that's coming up. But yeah, how do you
What
get
about honoring the whole Seder thing? Because that was to remind you, look, I took you out of this Egypt. I'm the one who did it. So this is the beginning of your year. How do we apply that today? Because we don't celebrate Passover.
Yeah. I'd have to make a rule for that. Okay, we're going to do this now. The idea that recognizing God did deliver our ancestors, and it's a rule for all the time for the Jews living in there. We're not bound by that rule. We're bound by the principle, recognizing that it begins and ends with God, that God is in control. The idea of being ready. They were supposed to eat with their sandals on and the unleavened bread and all that, the haste, eating in haste, celebrating that.
For me, the most important part is it's required of them to teach their children, which is something we've kind of, I don't want to say we've forgotten it, but we don't make a big deal. One of the problems that Barb and I run into when you start talking or trying to talk to Muslims, by the time a kid is 12, he can recite the entire Quran. Show me a 12-year-old that can recite the Bible. And we've made a huge mistake in not taking seriously educating them.
We had for Christianity on, it was always the parents' responsibility to teach the children.
Right.
I have given out information with 30 questions, basic catechism questions. For most all time, parents would teach these to their children when they're 12 or 13 years old. They'd give before the priest or the preacher, and the preacher would ask them any question from those 30. Explain to me Trinity. Explain to me sanctification. Explain to me, what is church? And the child wouldn't have a verbatim quote, but the child would have to be expected to give a logical, intelligent answer. I've talked to grown-ups. They couldn't answer that, let alone teach it to their children. Sunday school took that away from the parents. We'll teach your kids. We'll teach your kids. So parents stopped educating children and gave it over to Sunday school, and Sunday school failed miserably to teach the basic questions. Theology, it's just doctrine. It's almost a bad word in churches. That's the very stuff children would have learned by age 12 or 13, up until the Sunday school of 1600s, 1700s, race school, when the Sunday school program got going in England, industrial. It was during the Industrial Revolution that Sunday schools took off and parents stopped being responsible for their children's education. Look where we're at now. So, yeah, teach it to your children. Put it on the doorpost, at the head, at the hands, when you get up, when you lay down, constantly. That, we don't write it on the doorposts. We don't write it on the whole phylactery, the scripture, it actually put on the
Funny little box.
Yeah, funny little box. And wrapping their hands. This was a literal thing. It was meant to be spiritual, the head and the hand. How you think and what you do. Keep the word of God constantly in your head, on your forehead, and in your hand, and in your activities and what you do. That's the principle behind it. The Seder supper, I think we do a whole lot better if we spent more time during Holy Week of actually having, and we tried it last year and it didn't quite work out what it should, but the whole idea is you have this Seder supper, and it's a feast. It's a celebration. Then the very next day, you have the Tenebrae service, which is a roller coaster ride of emotions. They're celebrating on Thursday. You can't have more fun than this. Well, you could if you weren't Protestant, because they have 4 glasses of wine that night. We're too uptight. No, we can't have alcohol. And they normally drank 2 glasses of wine. And this comes out in the Seder supper. Father, normally we drink 2 glasses. Tonight we drink 4. Why is that? And the father said, so they're drinking twice as much alcohol as they normally would. They're having fun. They're celebrating. It's all the peak. And then the next day, woof, you crash. And then you wait through Saturday until you celebrate Easter morning. It's a tremendous emotional roller coaster ride if you let yourself do it. But we've lost the tradition. We don't bother to do it for the most part. I think we'd be better off if we did. But yeah, if people buy into it. I think I've been getting off track here, but it's a good question. How do we keep that principle alive? by celebrating the freedom from slavery, by really celebrating it. Maybe we should have more love feasts together as a church, celebrating our release from slavery to sin and death through Jesus Christ, who is the modern translation of that. God saved the Jews from their slavery in Egypt. God saved us from slavery to sin. Maybe we should have more celebratory meals like that. Not just because, oh, you have 50-year plus membership, but no, because God saved us. We're having a fellowship meal because of that. I think we'd be better
What
off.
could be better?
Huh?
What could be better?
Yeah.
Brian, can you elaborate on Exodus 13 to 16? It says, when God asked for the firstborn, did they sacrifice for remembrance for the firstborn from Egypt? He didn't actually sacrifice the firstborn of the Hebrew people.
No.
It was in remembrance of the firstborns that were sacrificed in Egypt.
They were redeemed. Let me just check what it says. 13 to 16.
Yeah.
Redeem with the lamb every firstborn donkey. If you do not redeem it, break its neck. Redeem every firstborn male among your sons. And your sons ask me, what does this mean? The mighty hand of God brought us out of Egypt, land of slavery. Refusal to kill the firstborn, both people and land of Egypt. So that's why we sacrifice, O Lord, the first male offspring of every womb. Redeem each of my firstborn sons. So you will redeem them. But you're supposed to sacrifice the firstborn to God, because God passed over and saved them. No, they did not sacrifice their children.
It was just the way it was read out. I was like, nah, this don't sound right.
Yeah.
So it was just a memorial, basically, of
was
sacrifice that was given for them.
As part of that Seder, remembering what happened that night. The firstborn, and this one apparently is every firstborn, not just from the Pharaoh down to this dungeon person. The firstborn male died, but not the Jews. And God says later on, he says, I claim the firstborn, so to redeem them. And then when he starts dividing things up, he says, I'm claiming the Levites as my people. They're going to be my redeemed people. And they have to make stipulations for that. But it's all this, I mean, where does it ever happen that a superpower like Egypt, where there's a whole group of people that just leave and form their own nation and just take the spoils of the capturing country? Where in the history of the world has a nation ever came up overnight, became into power, and had so much influence? They despoiled Egyptians. This is truly an amazing thing, which we kind of, well, it's kind of a myth. There's only 2 feet of water, and we tear it to pieces. We lose the magic of it.
Well, I mean, if you just look at the gravity of the amount of people, the amount of property that they took, the amount of property they took from the Egyptians, so they were pretty wealthy once they left. I mean, that's sheer size alone, whether the sea parted or not, it doesn't matter. I mean, the Egyptians were never given their servants up for that. Never.
No.
Unless they had COVID and they were spreading.
Get out. Yeah.
Somewhere I saw a study that said if you were stationary object as Israel went past you, it would pass you for days. There were so many people, animals, and it wasn't a little parade.
Plus the rabble.
Yeah.
The ones that weren't Israelites, but they were coming along anyway, causing a lot of trouble. Yeah. And if you read a lot of commentaries that talk this down, there's a lot of modern, postmodern theologians out there who frankly don't believe in miracles. So they have to discredit all of this. They have to try to find some natural occurrence for it maybe to happen. Okay, they're entitled to their opinion. It's still America. They're still allowed to do that here.
I'm talking too much now. I have a hard time with that because the resurrection is a miracle. And if you don't believe in the resurrection, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And yet I've met ordained folks aren't real sure about the resurrection. Say what?
Yeah. As
I
I start
just
from,
don't understand.
yeah,
There's talk about bones in this chapter. And Joseph's
Joseph's
bones
bones,
being
yeah.
taken with them. And that you shouldn't break the bone of the animal being purchased for
the Passover lamb. Yeah,
Passover.
don't break the bone.
So what's the meaning or significance of the bones and Joseph's bones?
Well, bones for Joseph is what's left of him, and his body wants to be permanently deposited with his,
Father,
gathered with his family,
yeah,
which is
family.
literally going back to that
Mhm.
cave, Machpelah,
Canaan?
yeah, which Abraham bought. So taking those bones up, breaking the bones, not breaking the bone of the lamb. I've never read anything as to the significance of that for the sacrifice, except that the sacrificial lamb, no bones were broken.
Right.
And on the crucifixion, if you don't know about this, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves, but you're nailed, this was considered the hand back then in Greek as well. And if you nail through here, the body weight would just tear it apart. But you can nail between the radius and the ulna. There's enough tendons there to keep the body weight. Radial nerve also goes through there. And if that ever gets nicked, it's excruciating pain. So they can hang from that. The reason they nailed the feet was they need to breathe. And if you're just dangling there, you can't breathe. So they nail the feet so you can push off to get a breath. And every time you push off, your back is scored raw from the cat of nine tails, and you push it against this wood, which is excruciating pain as well. But you eventually die from suffocation because your lungs fill up with fluid and you drown in your own fluids after 2 or 3 days. Okay, so we need to speed this along. It's getting dark. The Jews want this over with. We break their bones. They can no longer push off. They suffocate. Oh, it looks like he's already dead. Check it out. Stick a spear in the side. Out rushes blood and water. His lungs are full of fluid. Yeah, he's dead. Didn't need to break any bones. Sacrificial lamb didn't get his legs broken. The other 2 thieves did. So I think of it more in terms of what is significance for our sacrificial lamb. I don't really know why. I've never come across anything that said why you couldn't break a bone of a lamb. Sacrificed whole. Yeah.
I thought it was cool that Joseph had faith and knew his bones would be carried back to, carried out to where they're supposed to go. After 70 years?
How long it took? Well, it was a total of 400 years
400
and they weren't slaves the whole 400 years. It turned out they started out as favored people. And somewhere along the line, that Pharaoh, archaeology tells us that he wasn't a purebred Egyptian. They were kind of like an invading army. The Egyptians regained power throughout. I can't think of the name of the Phoenicians, something or another. So anybody who wasn't a pure Egyptian was no longer favorable. So the Jews became slaves. So somewhere in there, they went from being favored people to becoming slaves. It was a total of 420 years, I think it said.
Wasn't it 70 years they were slaves, something like that. But anyway, the fact that Joseph knew God would fulfill his promise and
Yeah.
be buried with his family.
Joseph's character, man, he put up with 13 years of slavery and prison. And then, God did this to make it happen. So, yeah, he's pretty totally convinced that God would make it happen.
This is off topic, but it's on what you just said. So why would they dislocate their shoulders when they crucify them?
I've never heard they dislocated the shoulders.
No, I thought they dislocated their shoulder because they would like stretch them out so far, it would literally dislocate their shoulder.
No,
Unless it was just for more excruciating pain.
they'd have to leave them enough so they could breathe.
Maybe that was a movie I saw.
Might have been.
Like
Most
the
likely.
Moses.
Yeah, that could have been.
Well, you thought Charlton Heston was Moses.
That's what I grew up knowing.
They had pictures, I'm sure they knew what he looked like.
Check the old photo gallery. Now, there may have been something to that. I've never heard that. When they draw and quarter someone in the medieval tortures and stuff, they would dislocate the shoulders. They pull them in every direction.
Yeah, I just watched Braveheart the other
Yeah.
day.
So
Stretched
I had to
out.
draw and quarters. I mean, between the radial nerve being shattered and there's excruciating pain, both wrists, the back is raw from a cat of nine and you're pushing. And you don't want to push up. You cannot stop breathing. You can't convince yourself. You have to, like 12 times a minute.
That's why you can't hold your breath and kill yourself.
Plus, yeah. So, and again, the Romans were good at what they did. This was the most horrible, excruciating way for someone to die. And they weren't lifted. Now I'm getting off topic. We got more questions here.
Yeah.
We'll hit this at Easter.
In the Exodus 12:5, you're talking about breaking the bones of the sheep. The animals you shall choose must be year-old males without defect. Maybe has something to do with it for the Passover
You want
meal.
it perfect.
Yeah, it had to be a perfect animal. I knew I read that somewhere. It took me a little while to find it.
Try to read where it said that you're not allowed to break its bones.
Oh, that was,
Chapter 12 of Exodus. Somewhere.
I really,
It's funny the detail
yeah.
going into for the bones
Yes, I
that we don't even do
The
anyway.
analogy was,
Need to
it
find a
said,
Jewish guy.
well, the prophecy was that his bones would not be broken. And that was fulfilled. Now, if it said that the Passover lamb was not to have the broken bones, okay, but we do the analogy that he's the Passover lamb, so you wouldn't have broken the bones. I never,
Maybe it was all in just being very respectful and careful how you transported it.
I wouldn't take any, I never made a connection between Joseph's bones and the Passover lamb being completely consumed and burnt up. Joseph just knew this was going to happen, so he made them promise. We have just a minute. Matthew 16. This is a big deal because if you're raised Roman Catholic, Peter is the rock. And on this rock, this is Matthew 16, starting at 16. There's a big distinction between our brothers who are Roman Catholic and themselves. Jesus said, who do you say that I am? Verse 16, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." Jesus replied, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock." Peter in Greek is Petros, means rock as well. "And on this rock I will build my church. Gates of Hades will not overcome it." So from a Catholic, you're saying Jesus said, "On you, Peter, I will build my church." So Peter is the ultimate disciple, and he is the authority. And spiritually, every pope since Peter is a spiritual descendant of Peter. Therefore, the pope has the authority to speak ex cathedra. It's the voice of God. If Pope says it, he is. If you're saying on this rock, the person Peter, or if he's saying the foundation that Peter just testified, you are the Messiah, that on this rock this foundation, I will build my church. So the Protestants say, no, it wasn't the man Peter, it was the statement that that Jesus is the Messiah, Son of the living God. This is the foundational rock upon which I will build my church. So that's really brief. We only have a few minutes left, but in a nutshell, between our brothers and sisters, which we can have this conversation in heaven with them, they'll be up there too. But we're like, no, we're not giving the Pope credit for being the spiritual successor to Peter. This one phrase is the only thing that would give them that authority to say that's who the Pope is. And we're saying, sorry, no, we don't go there.
Especially if you look at the history of some of the popes. It shows how human they were.
They had at least two popes going for a while. One was in Spain, and one was in Italy.
Yeah.
And it's, and
Yeah, there were some bad popes.
The Catholic Church isn't that bad. Without the Catholic Church, we don't have this book.
hey, the Jewish ancestors, the Roman Catholics were Jews. That's our history. That's our ancestry. We just didn't pop up during the Reformation. We have background. This whole thing in the Old Testament. This is our story. This is our history. And we need to own it. Even the bad stuff. The Crusades was a horrible thing. But it's our history. And it was us.
Carrying the rules too far.
Oh, it was just abuse of power. Just, yeah, I've done some studies on that, the 4 or 5 different crusades. Oh, horrible.
My dad has a funny story. He tells me he was in the Navy, met my mom who was Catholic, and he had been Protestant. His family, he was Baptist. I mean, he's been to all kinds of revivals as a kid.
Okay.
And he decided to take the catechism and become Catholic without my mom's, my mom didn't tell him to.
Yeah.
And he started doing it. A friend of his was a Baptist. And he goes, "What are you doing taking that devil stuff?" And my dad had done some study. And this fellow was Baptist. And he says, "Well, where do you think the Baptist church started?" And he goes, "With John the Baptist."
Oh, wow.
Or not.
Yeah.
My dad got real kick out of that. He still tells that story.
It's a good story. It's worth telling.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
We're one little anecdote, and we'll just because I can't pass that. So the Sunday school class, and the Sunday school superintendent was talking about stuff. Which Bible is appropriate? King James, the New Living Translation, NIV, all that. And I said, I think I was a seminary at that time. I said, if you really want to get down to what's really there, you have to go back to the original language. And they were like, oh yeah. And so the next week, Ken says, like Brian said, you have to go back to the King James version to really get the original language. It's like, all right, let it go. Let it go. Thank you for being with us. We will join you again next week, and keep reading. Don't quit reading. We're heading into some tough stuff right now. Go for it. Bye-bye.
Can I add one more?
Yes.
While we're on a roll?